Hello, good evening, and welcome to episode 66 of Fracking Nightmare. 66 episodes. I have no idea where the last 18 months or so, or nearly 2 years now, has gone. But the good news is that the UK is still frack-free. And there's every evidence to suggest that we will finish 2015 frack-free. And with a number of groups that are growing around the country, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on, there's a very strong possibility that the government might actually start to realise that it's bitten off more than it can chew. Now, for those of you who were watching last week's episode 65, then you will know that we focused on events in Scotland, and particularly the quest to introduce underground coal gasification in the east of Scotland, particularly under the Forth. And the prime player there is OLGA Clough, who's the owner of Clough Resources. Now, it seems that that show really put the cat amongst the proverbial pigeons, because there was a tremendous reaction from within Scotland. But sadly, it also reflected something that is becoming a symptom within the consciousness, within the psyche of the UK. It became very polarising. And it seems that social media has played its part in effectively shutting down rational debate, rational discussion. The attitude of people today is that unless you agree with everything that I agree with, then you must be a mortal enemy. Whatever happened to debate? So what we're seeing is people either taking this side of the argument or this side of the argument, and there's nothing in between. Well, I don't think that that's particularly healthy. And this is the graphic that we put up last week for the episode of Fracking Nightmare on YouTube. OLGA Clough and Jim Ratcliffe of INEOS and Nicola Sturgeon very kindly gifting us the opportunity to show that she's in their hands. And we discussed the fact that Nicola Sturgeon had had a meeting with Jim Ratcliffe of INEOS on the morning of the day back in January when she announced a moratorium on unconventional gas exploitation in Scotland. The only issue is that she didn't include underground coal gasification in that moratorium. Now, I was talking with my guest Mel Kelly last week, and we were discussing the distinct possibility that the discussion that Nicola had with Jim Ratcliffe was assuring him that basically had nothing to worry about. The moratorium needed to be in place to ensure that the SNP got their expected massive majority, both in the Westminster elections, which proved to be the case. 56 out of 59 MPs returned to Westminster, being SNP, the other 3 being one from each of the mainstream parties. And now, of course, they're looking to move from having exactly half of the Scottish Parliament, 64 seats, to looking at having something in the region of 2/3. 2/3 majority in Holyrood, coupled with an overwhelming majority of the Scottish MPs in Westminster, would effectively create a situation for Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP to pretty much do whatever they wanted. And the other aspect of this is that what seems to be the case is that if you question anything that Nicola Sturgeon or the SNP are doing, then you are automatically labelled as being anti-independence or anti-SNP. Now, in my case, nothing can be further from the truth, and anybody who wishes to look at the episodes that I did of Humanity versus Insanity, either side of the September 18th referendum last year, will know that not only am I pro-Scottish independence, I also offered some insights as to how the Scottish government could ensure its national sovereignty. Unfortunately, it's, funnily enough, chose to, at least thus far, ignore my counsel. So Mel was equally disturbed, by this polarisation. So what we have done is we are going to host a special event on Sunday, the 27th of September. And this event is called Fracked, Tracked and Hacked. And the subtitle of the event is Scotland Becoming a Totalitarian Police State? Now, this may sound somewhat extreme unless you are familiar with what is unfolding in Scotland right now. Now, what I want to do is I'm just going to give you an insight, because we are going to be talking about, at this event, we're going to be talking about how Scotland is becoming a surveilled state. In fact, Glasgow is now the most surveilled city in Europe, even topping London. And we're going to show you a short video clip, which is a promo video from the company called NICE, which looks at the suspect tracking system that is now fully embedded into the surveillance systems within Glasgow. Take a look at this.
If you need to locate the owner of this unattended baggage, you'd best hope it's not here. If this child were lost, it would be easy to find him here. But what if it was here? Or here? Or here? These are situations in which locating your target within minutes is essential. With NICE Suspect Search, the next generation video search and track application, you can do it easily. Instead of watching hours of video, it presents you with the relevant images, so you can run the search across a vast number of security cameras and locations to find a person of interest within minutes and automatically track their route on a map. Enhancing situational awareness, enabling immediate response, and expediting forensic searches, NICE Suspect Search can help you reduce your search time from hours to minutes. NICE Suspect Search, when time is of the essence.
Of the surveillance systems that are being implemented in Scotland, it is becoming increasingly clear that the Scottish government, like Westminster, is looking to implement a system where anyone who challenges government orthodoxy will be classified as a domestic extremist. Already in Scotland, journalists are being spied upon. Journalists are getting lifetime bans for publishing articles which challenge Scottish orthodoxy. So we'll also be talking, of course, about the unconventional gas agenda. And Mel Kelly will be not only talking about underground coal gasification, but also the treachery that Nicola Sturgeon has carried out in effectively selling off Scottish water rights to Westminster. So is perhaps Scottish independence simply a charade? Is the euphoria within Scotland right now going to effectively give the SNP a free rein to establish their totalitarian state? Before anybody starts shouting me down and saying, this is completely crazy, then I suggest that you start looking at the facts. And what we will be doing on Sunday the 27th is presenting those facts. Now, details of that event can be found on my website. That's www.ianrcrane.com, and you can't miss the link. Now, as it happens, tonight, INEOS have already started. In fact, tonight is the first night of their 18-town tour, their exhibition, to convince the community as to how safe unconventional gas exploitation is and that they have nothing to worry about. Of course, the one thing that you will never hear anybody from INEOS say is, look, don't take our word for it. Please take a look at this for yourself and check it out and then come back to us, because we know that when you start looking at it, then you will realize just how safe this is. So here's the on-screen shot of the 18 cities, but you could also find it on Facebook, on any of the Scottish anti-fracking Facebook pages. And of course, there is another event coming up at Holyrood, and this is between 1 and 5 p.m. on Saturday, the 26th of September. And hopefully this will see the anti-fracking community come together in Scotland. I know there's a number of people coming up from south of the border to show solidarity with the anti-fracking community in Scotland. And the night before on Friday the 25th of September, quite possibly somewhere around the Falkirk area, there will be a screening of voices from the gas fields. And I'm not sure that I've mentioned it previously, but we had a report from somebody connected with DEC that they had commissioned a third party to try to pull apart the Voices from the Gas Fields documentary. Having watched it, apparently they decided that the best thing they could do was ignore it, which I think actually speaks volumes. So that's Scotland. And of course, we're not out of the woods by any stretch of the imagination in England. And hopefully now I do have a connection with Helen Chuntso. Helen, how are you doing?
Good evening, Ian. Very well, thank you.
Well, we had a little bit of, obviously, a technical hitch there. And I understand that we now no longer have a video connection, but we do have your audio. So we can hear you loud and clear at the moment. Can you hear me?
I can indeed, Ian. Good evening.
Good evening. Okay, well, look, I'm going to put up, because you, as I said to you earlier, you've done a really remarkable job of keeping your picture off the web. But, of course, this was your old stomping ground. This is Barton Moss. And at the time of the Barton Moss campaign, of course, you lived not too far away, but you've moved into West Yorkshire now. Unfortunately, of course, you haven't got away from the Mother-Frackers. But today you were back in your stomping ground because you were at the civil courts in Manchester. And just to remind our listeners and viewers that what was going on in Manchester was the continuation of the hearing regarding the allegation that iGas had contaminated the Barton Moss well site. And of course, we've previously reported that reporting restrictions were in place, so there was a limit as to what could be broadcast. But the nub of it was that and some PAHs, polyacrylic aromatic hydrocarbons, were discovered on the well site. And of course, this is pretty nasty stuff, and it certainly shouldn't have been there. And iGas were challenged to allow an independent expert, an independent chemist, to take samples from the site. But iGas and the landowner, Peel Holdings, for a considerable period, refused to allow access to the site. Now, Helen, you were in court today for the continuation of this hearing. So can you give us a bit of an insight in what transpired today?
I'd just like to clarify that the judge was very kind at the end of the hearing in clearing up that he is absolutely satisfied that the reporting restrictions may be lifted on this case. Just for clarity, this case sits on top of course, the protectors who were arrested, and should this activity be judged to be unlawful at the Barton Moss iGas site, then those cases will disappear.
And that's some 40-odd cases, I believe.
It's over 40 people, and it's 52 charges in total, which are governed by 4 solicitors that are currently dealing with them. So all of those 45 people that have charges made against them, this case means a great deal. And they have seen the ins and outs of this trial play on for quite some time now.
So the downside is that, of course, these 40-odd people still have this hanging over them, and that's a bit unfortunate, because obviously it's, for some of them now, it's coming up to almost 2 years. But nonetheless, I mean, obviously the more important thing is, and this is the reason why the protection community were at Barton Moss, to not only try and obviously ensure that the moss was not fracked, but also to ensure that iGas had an expensive operation, and that they were monitored and put under scrutiny.
Well, it's quite appropriate that that this whole process is put under appropriate scrutiny. As we know, the government are pulling staff from the Environment Agency who are underfunded, understaffed, and quite frankly, in my opinion and in the opinion of many people, underskilled to deal with this. In fact, Sarah Scott, who was called to court last time to give evidence on behalf of the prosecution for the Environment Agency, Sadly, she couldn't interpret the Environment Agency's own guidance. She did a very good job, I'm informed, of being fair and accurate in her evidence, but there has been quite clear evidence that the Environment Agency is struggling to implement and interpret their own guidance on this, and this is why we have this ongoing problem that we saw in court today. It began, this court case, looking like drilling mud had been dumped at the back of the compound, which is what caused that's what raised the alarm. It's quite appropriate that the protection community is there and that the scientists were called, because when things look out of order, it's usually correct. It transpires that the court believe, from the independent experts' witness statements and samplings, that mud was not drilling mud. That mud was from the excavation and the setting up of the site. Therefore, that mud was not contaminated, as was discussed in great detail between the two barristers today. An operation comprises of many stages. It comprises of setting up the site, it comprises drilling. If it then goes on to flow testing or hydraulic fracturing, of course, those are further stages. But what the protesters were there to protest was any of those operations. It was not merely just the drilling. So the fact that this this allegation of dumping was actually made outside of the exact action of the drilling is something that the judge will be dealing with, because it is inappropriate in the opinion of Richard Brigden, acting for the defence of the protectors, that you can cut the work that IGAS were doing up into such convenient sections.
So basically, what is being alleged here is that, if I understand this correctly, is that the contamination, according to IGAS, was not as a result of their drilling operations, but as a result of operations prior to them actually arriving on the site. Possibly nothing to do with them at all, but to previous usage of that particular location.
That appears to be the evidence that was discussed in court during the last session, for which I was not there, but the judge did hear that. However, is no doubt in anybody's mind present today that what happened as a result of that contamination was found. There were a few things that were found. There was elevated levels of cadmium downstream at 4 times the concentration downstream than upstream. Much discussion was made as to where that first group of contamination could have come from. Where did the cadmium come from? And if it was historical, i.e. it was there on the sites before IGAS begun, it was not something that was added by the IGAS operations. It was something that was predating that, but that was stirred up as a result of those operations. So things can become more soluble as a result of mobility on site, was as I understand it.
So this all sounds very potentially very convenient for IGAS, and also, I mean, unfortunately, it sets an interesting precedent if the judge does rule in their favour, because what it's saying is that basically any company that, whether it contaminates or not, because we know that the industry sadly has a very casual relationship with truth, so they could present a scenario where they claim that any contamination was nothing at all to do with them, and it must have come from whatever else was occupying that site at some previous juncture. I mean, have IGAS actually offered any suggestion as to if the origins of that contamination, if they are not responsible for it?
The court case today, I don't know what IGAS offered for that, because I haven't been party to those conversations. But what I do know is that the Environment Agency and witness Sarah Scott and Foley, when they discussed this, were clear that it was something that predated IGAS's operations, but it had been created as a result, said Dr. Foley, of the movement upon the site. This is important because this allows the discharge to groundwater argument to come in, which is one of the grounds upon which the activity on site could be said to be illegal.
Illegal on the basis that they didn't do any pre-arrival sampling.
There was pre-arrival sampling, but whether or not that pre-arrival sampling can be conflated with the existing evidence is something that the judge will be looking at tonight. What I do have, however, is information from the Environment Agency's document to do with the planning regime for soil guidance, for soil guideline valuations, and it states that land contamination is also a material consideration under the planning regime. So the local planning authority, quote, has a duty to consider the potential implications of contamination. Therefore, IGAS should have been having this represented as a material consideration by Salford City Council. The relationship between the planning regime in the granting of planning permission for new development, including permission to carry out remediation. This planning policy statement 23 states that remediation must remove unacceptable risk to human health and make the site suitable for its intended use. As a minimum, after carrying out the development and commencement of its use, the land should not be capable of being determined as contaminated land under Part 2A, and that's DEFRA's ruling in 2008. So given that this land is now what could be described as contaminated under GAC guidelines, which are guidelines that outline what would be dangerous to human health, we now have that situation on Barton Moss, and the activity on site has actually contributed to the mobilisation of cadmium and the contamination of it. The polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons that were found there, or the PAHs, are also part of that picture, I understand.
So this has some very, very interesting implications, doesn't it? Because if this is stirred up these toxins on Barton Moss, then it's a question of where else could these toxins be stirred up, and of course the reality is that the industry potentially has a get out which says, oh sorry Gov, nothing to do with us, it actually all occurred before we got on site.
Absolutely, and it's also curious that the British Geological Survey had been looking at cadmium, lead and zinc contaminating peat, which is on the moss, and have a system called GBase on Google Earth that shows all the samples taken. It appears from study in this area that Chat Moss, Barton Moss, is an area that they're focused on, so there should be those existing levels available. So one of the things that was an argument about due diligence of both the Environment Agency and IGAS being called into question was given that they were aware from the initial data set which the Environment Agency did have, that dangerous systems could enter the water system, and if they were mobilised by activity on the site, they would enter the water table as they would have higher solubility. Sarah Scott at the Environment Agency said that nothing has been done to mitigate this.
Well, why am I not surprised? I mean, the Environment Agency, is behind the eight ball. I mean, they're having their resources pared back, and as we know, the Environment Agency do not have sufficient resources, and that's even assuming that they actually have the expertise. But the reality is that they can't even provide the bare minimum of monitoring for an industry that hasn't even got to first base yet. And they're claiming that the government is claiming that it has gold standard regulations in place to ensure that stuff like this doesn't happen. Yet every single well site that's been established in this country to date by the unconventional gas industry has led to environmental breaches.
Well, this is what the argument we heard in court today is that there has definitely, according to the defence, been a breach. Whether the dumping of the mud happened, and we are talking about dumping. Why would you dump mud? If it was the excavation of the site, many unconventional gas operations use this to become the bund. Why were iGas dumping this over the fence? It's quite bizarre behaviour. It's rude, to say the least, but to say the worst. If that and they are unclear, the court was unclear, because that information was not with them as to when that happened. Now, if that happened before the 1st of October, the regulations governing it changed. Now, if that happened before then, there would need to be, beyond all certainty, the operator would have had to notify the Environment Agency that they would be reusing that mud. No such notification was made. When questioned about this, Sarah Scott of the Environment Agency said that she, let me get the quote right, she believed there was I think it was a possibility. I'm sorry, I don't have the exact quote to hand, but the point is that the Environment Agency could not say and could not state that mud would be reused. Therefore, it was necessary for there to be a permit for that, and there wasn't if that happened prior to the 1st of October. If it happened after the 1st of October, it would have fallen under the Mining Waste Directive, for which a permit would have been required. So either way, they don't know when they dumped it. For some reason, that is not known. You obviously go around dumping mud over somebody's fence and forgetting what date you do it on, therefore not knowing which regulation you're supposed to be adhering to. And whichever way it was, they didn't adhere to the correct regulation. So there is a there is a legal argument that is actually an offence.
Okay, well, and of course, the reason that people need to be very concerned about this is that iGas is trying to position itself as the UK's leading unconventional gas exploitation merchant. And of course, iGas has partnerships with INEOS, with Peel Oil and Gas, with Total, and with various other Mickey Mouse outfits around the country. And this is not their first drilling operation, but is their first attempt to drill an unconventional well to these depths. Of course, they drilled down to just over 10,000 feet, right down to the bedrock, specifically to take samples of the shale, with every intention, of course, of going back to Barton Moss. But the reality is that they're not going back to Barton Moss for many, many reasons, just as we expected they wouldn't. But nonetheless, that doesn't negate their responsibility to uphold the gold standards that the government supposedly has in place.
I think it's absolutely incorrect of you, Ian, to call their comrades Mickey Mouse. Mickey Mouse has been around for a lot longer.
And that's true.
And probably, even though he's a cartoon character, wouldn't behave in quite such a... there is something that is that people need to be aware of, that that's what that fence is for. It's there so you can't see what is being done. It's not just to keep people out. It's so as there is no transparency that goes on here. Where is the paperwork that was sent to the Environment Agency? Why are the Environment Agency unaware of what permit should have been granted for this mud? This is apparently during the excavation stage, the setting up of the site. This is before. Apparently the drill got in the ground. They can't get that right. They have to dump the mud. This is like children throwing the shoes off when they get in the door. It's like, what are they going to do when they really get into what they want? There is a real issue here about the attitude. To say that the Wildcats would be missing the point a little here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, of course, it endorses why it is so essential for communities around the country to educate themselves. And of course, as you're well aware, Barton Moss was the second effort to establish an exploratory well. I should say the third, because of course Priest Hall was the first. Borkum was the second, but Quadrilla weren't able to complete the operation at Borkum. They ran out of time. Then at Barton Moss, and of course, when the activity kicked off, the local community really had no idea, or a handful of people did, of course, including yourself, but the vast majority of the people in the community had no idea as to the magnitude of the potential damage and contamination this industry would cause. And the experiences from these sites, fortunately, now provide all of the communities that are now being targeted with a heads up. And of course, the one thing, well, not just one, but one of the things that the industry, fortunately, has no idea how to counter is the phenomenal level of knowledge and awareness amongst various communities around the country. And, it far exceeds anything that any other industry has ever experienced. I mean, I was at an event in North Yorkshire recently, 450 people in the room, and the level of knowledge of this industry amongst the people in that room was truly staggering. Had John Dewar of Third Energy been there, then he would have been literally quaking in his boots, because these people are passionate.
Absolutely, and it's because of that passion that that we're actually having this discussion. If it wouldn't have been for the diligence of the protection camp in spotting what was actually going on at not only Barton Moss but several sites throughout the UK, notably in East Yorkshire, a lot of these things would have been missed. It can't be emphasised enough that regulation is not gold standard. It will not save you. Regulation is what should happen on paper. This is what happens on the ground in reality, and there is no way to monitor that without people and boots on the ground. So we really have to thank people for just looking out for what is happening, because this is a case of, if we can get away with it, then it might actually happen. Why I ask, did iGas and Peel Holdings take so long to respond to the judge's order that sampling should be taken? Why did they drag their heels with that? What is this bizarre relationship that goes on between Peel Holdings and iGas really all about? Why are they the benevolent landlord that
it's a symbiotic relationship, which is why Peel have established Peel Oil and Gas. I mean, it's an absolute symbiosis. Of course, the fact that they wouldn't allow an expert on site speaks volumes. I mean, I think we can reliably conject that they were hoping that the renowned Manchester rainfall would wash whatever contaminants were in the mud through to the point where there was no evidence of it. But how naive can you get?
Well, I don't think that having heavy metals discharged to groundwater when that is known by the operator is a suitable way to operate, and that is something to which the local area should be glad that has been flagged up.
Absolutely. Okay, Helen. So the case continues tomorrow. The judge is deliberating overnight. Is that correct? And he's going to announce his verdict tomorrow?
That's right. The judge basically has to determine whether it is clear that activity on the site was lawful or not, and if he determines that the activity was lawful, and the Crown appears not to be able to prove that the activity was lawful, the burden of proof is lying with the prosecution on this, and the court does not have that baseline data, so it's going to be very hard for that to be proved. And without that baseline data, the big question for the for this fledgling industry is how can you say that your operations are in the benefit and the interests of communities if you cannot prove to them that the consequences of any actions going wrong were not done by you? That's very convenient, isn't it? So at present we are being told that we can't prove that, even though BGS seem to have a copy of some of this data of cadmium. I think that the judge is going to have a tough call tonight, and as we know, he's been a very fair judge and has seen a lot of the cases for the protectors go through court, and he's soon to retire. So there will be some deliberation. For any of those people that are out there who are protectors whose case has been dragged on and on and on through the court, it is expected to come out tomorrow, and local press can pick this up from the court, but the solicitors will be notified. So if you just watch this space, it'll be out there very, very soon. What has happened? It's information that's in the public domain. The judge just wanted to deliberate without dragging everybody back to court. So it's basically a written, just not a verbal verdict. So we're really all looking forward to hearing what he says.
Okay, excellent. And of course, if people want to get up-to-date information, they can either obviously get it from Twitter or Facebook, or the outstanding Drill or Drop website. This is Ruth Hayhurst's website. She was in court today, and she has an article which sort of outlines what transpired, although she does seem to think tomorrow's Friday. So.
Can I just take the opportunity to thank Dr. Aidan Foley for stepping forward to give the independent scientific testing and testimony in court. The judge praised both him and the Environment Agency lady for actually being so accurate and so fair in the statements. I think that Dr. Foley has been an example of science working truthfully here, and this is exactly what the industry needs, people who are willing to work in that way. I'd like to say a big thank you to him for his work here.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Helen. Now, Helen, don't run away, because I want to get your views on a couple of other issues, but we're going to take a short break, and we'll be back after this.
The Alternative View Conference. The AV6 DVD collection. Enjoy 13 fantastic presentations on 12 discs from some of the best researchers in their fields.
What a weekend, hey? What a weekend, what a range of speakers, what a hard bunch of acts to follow, really. I've heard some of the most important information here today, really, because honestly, I've spoken at a lot of gigs, and I'd say this is the best gig that I've spoken at.
These unique presentations are essential viewing for all those who have the eyes to see, the ears to hear, and who are now ready to participate in bringing about the changes that we all know we need to see. AV6. 12 discs in 2 volumes. Order now from ukcolumn.org. AV Events, taking positive activism to the next level.
And welcome back to part 2 of episode 66 of Fracking Nightmare. I've got Helen Chuntso on the phone line. Unfortunately, no video connection this evening, but a good audio connection. So Helen's been giving us her insights into the court case, the contamination court case of Barton Moss. But we're going to move on now, and we're going to talk about another subject that also reared its head for the first time at Barton Moss, when one of the protectors who worked with the emergency services attended a workshop which was run by a terrorism specialist amongst Greater Manchester Police. Now, obviously, as the leader of the workshop, she had no idea that any member of the audience had been at Barton Moss and had actually been part of the protection community. And this particular individual was extremely shocked and not a little disturbed to hear this terrorism specialist state that the protesters at Barton Moss were regarded as borderline domestic extremists. Well, this was a view that seems to have been portrayed throughout the police forces around the country, not least by Staffordshire Police in their report published earlier this year. But this reared its head again last week with this report in the Mail Online. The headline, anti-fracking protesters to be labelled extremists by police thanks to government terror strategy. Teachers told that campaigners against fracking may be extremists. And of course, MP Caroline Lucas was highlighted, who somebody could be a threat. Fury over the new interpretation of the Prevent Anti-Terror Strategy. Let's have a look at the opening paragraphs of this article. Anti-fracking protesters could be viewed as potential extremists under the government's new counter-terrorism strategy. Police have told teachers. The bizarre advice was offered during a training session as part of the Prevent strategy, which aims to stop youngsters being brainwashed by Islamic extremists. The group of 100 teachers were told that people campaigning against fracking in their local area could be regarded as having extreme views. They were also warned that environmental activists and anti-capitalists could be deemed a threat, with the Green MP Caroline Lucas given as an example. Dylan Murphy, a history teacher present at the training day, said, "The things that set alarm bells ringing in my head was when he started talking about environmental activists. I thought, are you equating anti-fracking protests and environmental protesters with neo-Nazis and terrorists?" Yesterday, critics voiced concern that officers appeared to be widening the remit of counter-terrorism strategy in schools to include protest groups. So I must confess that I wasn't the least bit shocked to read that, only because basically I was aware of the presentation that had occurred at Barton Moss. But I am, of course, appalled that this is the stance. Of course, we shouldn't be surprised because David Cameron did go across to the UN last September, and in a little reported speech, he made the observation that non-violent domestic extremists should be treated in the same way as ISIS. So, Helen, as a non-violent domestic extremist, as a mother with a young family who happens to be concerned about the well-being of the ecology in this country and the legacy that you leave to your children, what's your thoughts on that?
I'm actually rather intrigued that that on this occasion that they actually chose to take this to a bunch of educated people, namely teachers. This is a history teacher who made that statement, Dylan Murphy, that you mentioned before. A history teacher. History teachers have longer memories than perhaps police force might care to remember for them. A good friend of mine is actually an English teacher, and she is also what could be described as a domestic extremist, and she is concerned that she should be reporting herself from the point of view of safeguarding the children, because this is what it's about. If a teacher themselves and if a mother is actually deemed to be an extremist, are they saying that we are therefore a threat to children? Are they prepared to take it that far? And if that is the case, if a teacher is somebody who cannot teach with unless they have permitted views by the government, maybe they should consider changing the syllabus, because my friend is teaching in inspector calls at present, and she doesn't think that would be suitable according to the current thought of the government. We cannot allow both of these things to run concurrently. The ridiculous quotes that the police are giving out in the press, saying the police acknowledge the right of people to protest in a lawful manner. However, should an individual seek to use violence in furtherance of their view, which I would like to see the definition of, then Prevent would seek to engage with them. Prevent is not a criminal sanction. It is the partnership response to individuals who are at risk of being drawn into violent extremism. Would they care to define what at risk of being drawn into violent extremism is? Is that if your teacher is a domestic extremist and you have a class with them where you hold a discussion? Is that if your mother is an anti-fracking campaigner with the intention of preventing them coming to serious harm or causing serious harm to another person? We are talking about engaging with political dialogue. Is that now something that is harmful and we need to be defended from, Ian?
Well, this is the very disturbing nature of this, because basically it's effectively acknowledging that the government line on this is that anybody who has the audacity to have a view other than that of government orthodoxy is actually going to run the risk of being labelled as an extremist. And, actually, you may not be aware, but almost exactly 4 years ago, I debated in London with Professor Christopher French, Dr. Karen Douglas, and the Demos twins, Jamie Bartlett and Carl Miller. And each of these people are employed to conduct academic research into understanding why people do not simply take the government version of anything at face value. And, you know, Dr. Karen Douglas came out with an absolute classic statement. In fact, I've highlighted it. All these videos, by the way, are online. And she made the observation twice in the opening minutes of her presentation. And she stated categorically, I'm not interested in the truth. She was simply researching why it is that people don't believe that their government is actually looking after their best interests. And, you know, it could be argued that the protectors are being asked to believe that the government, the Environment Agency, the Health and Safety Executive, you know, are looking after their best interests. Now, everything that we've discussed tonight actually proves that, you know, that's not the case.
I think that there's a real need for the government to actually realise that the battle here is well beyond lost by them. With the global scientific community saying that we need to leave the burnable resources in the ground as a matter of urgency, and this is what's going to play out in Paris. I think the government needs to accept that people are listening to the scientific community more than the government's wish to push forward with this industry. Does that mean that somebody who listens to academic opinion is therefore an extremist, or is that simply the new name that we give to somebody who is educated? Do not underestimate, I've messaged with Mr. Cameron, do not underestimate the intelligence of your voters, even though that sounds like an unusual thing to say at this point. People are well able to get educated as to what fracking is, and if somebody is campaigning against it, it is quite simply because they have done the work. It's quite simply because they do not want that. That even the government's own polls are showing that people would rather have a wind turbine near their house than a fracking well. The political will has left, and it's only the UK government that are dragging the tails with it. That does not make people domestic extremists. It means that we are being forced into a category to suit the political will of the oil and gas industry, not that of the scientific community's intelligence.
Well, and the corporatist agenda, because it's going to get worse. Let me just share this with you, because, I mean, many people will have missed this because it was actually released deliberately, because obviously, the government spin merchants are very well versed in how to bury information that they don't want the public to pick up on. So, the day before the 14th round announcements, this appeared in the Daily Telegraph. 1/3 of UK suitable for a nuclear burial site. Nuclear waste which could remain radioactive for at least 100,000 years. Now I'm going to read the first few paragraphs of this article, written by Emily Gosden. And of course you and I have met Emily when she came up to Barton Moss a couple of times. And here's her article. At least 30% of the UK could have suitable geology for the construction of a £12 billion nuclear dump, experts have suggested, as they prepare for a new review to find areas where Britain's radioactive waste could be buried safely. Ministers have been searching for a permanent burial site for Britain's nuclear waste for decades, but were forced to restart the process after Cumbria, the only area to have expressed an interest in hosting the dump, pulled out in 2013. Experts from the British Geological Survey have been tasked with a fresh review of the geology of England, Wales and Northern Ireland, ahead of the renewed appeal to communities to volunteer as potential hosts. Yeah, like you would. The Scottish Government has already ruled out hosting a deep nuclear waste burial site. However, ministers have already said that councils in areas that express an interest will no longer have a guaranteed veto to block its construction, and have changed planning rules so that any application will be decided upon by national government. Now, we've discussed this previously because, in fact, the vote took place earlier this year, in just literally in the days before the last government went into purdah. i.e. the period at which it's not able to pass any legislation. And one of the last bills that it passed was the removal of all local authority participation in the decision-making process of where nuclear waste can be buried around the country. Now, for those people who are not familiar with the nuclear waste disposal process, I absolutely encourage you to go to YouTube and watch a film. It's in Finnish, but it is subtitled. It's called Into Eternity. And this is a documentary about the Finnish project, a country that is, I think, 7 times the size of the UK, with about a fifth of the population, and their project to construct a nuclear waste disposal facility. Now, in this country, of course, the white paper was published in July of last year, which discussed the proposition to turn the entire country into a toxic nuclear waste disposal facility. And we have, I believe, rightly flagged up the potential that the deep wells that are being constructed ostensibly for unconventional gas exploitation may actually have an ulterior purpose. So what are your thoughts on that, Helen?
It would be a matter of looking back at the regulatory process that has paved the way for this. As we saw with the infrastructure bill, the infrastructure bill allowed the storage and keeping of infrastructure underground. This enabled anything that was permitted by, we're back to the Environment Agency again, to be stored or kept underground. So drilling operations, as you said, there is the possibility that, subject to the necessary permits from the Environment Agency, nuclear waste could come under those categories. It did not specifically exempt that. So for anybody out there thinking that that would not be possible, that would be a question for the Environment Agency. Do you have any plans to permit the disposal of nuclear waste in such things? If you look at the borehole disposal concept, there are well under development and ready to roll things that would containers that would allow what appear to be a similar diameter to these boreholes, little capsules to store packets of nuclear waste. So the technology is there, the legislation has been manoeuvred into place. It's also interesting to note that the Telegraph might have been discussing that the day before the licensing, the 14th round was licensed. But on Sunday, the 5th of April, The Guardian made clear that the law was changed so nuclear waste dumps can be forced on local communities. That's articles available online. And the government turned it into an NSIP, a nationally significant infrastructure project. And that was in April that The Guardian reported that. And the Secretary of State for Energy would then be able to get advice from the Planning Inspectorate, but would not necessarily have to listen to any local councils. They can make as much noise as they want.
And the vote for that was 277 in favour and 33 against. And in a number of communities around the country, they are holding their MPs' feet to the fire, asking why they supported this breach of democratic process.
They were all contacted. There was a very strong lobby to all MPs about this. There's no MP that can say that they were not aware that this is happening. If they don't read the mail, that is not the fault of the electorate. This was an important decision that was voted unfavourably on.
Absolutely. Okay, Helen, we're running out of time. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. Thank you for going down to the courts in Manchester and giving us the report back there. We will wait with bated breath for Judge Prowse to give his judgment. Let's hope that justice prevails and that IGAS are called to account, and that the 40-odd protectors whose cases are awaiting the outcome of this will, of course, have their cases dropped. So thanks very much, Helen, and I'll catch up with you soon.
Okay, thanks very much for having me, Ian.
Thanks a lot. You take care now. Okay, we're coming towards the end of the show, but I just want to take a break, and in the break, I just want to play the trailer for Voices from the Gas Fields, because this film is being screened in communities all around the country to very, very significant effect. So take a look at this.
Shale gas is part of the future and we will make it happen.
I'm charged with, without lawful authority or excuse, obstructing the highway. Well, I believe I have lawful excuse.
We're going to take very great care that there is no damage to the water supply.
Gas at Barton Moss contaminated the well site. Then RAFFA Energy were responsible for considerable property damage as a result of their seismic testing.
There is a fishing lake which started to go down immediately following the detonation of these charges.
I think there's a huge amount of myths that are being put round in order to frighten people.
The first person that signed a well was the person that doomed us to this. An unconventional gas well isn't a pipe out of the ground. With it comes all of the drilling and the destruction. That's a hectare. Plus tracks, compressor stations, water holding ponds.
So we're right in the middle of the Australian bush here. Well, it was once bush.
We take a strip literally 520 kilometres for this one company. We sit on the Great Artesian Basin, one of the greatest water resources in the world, and they are allowed to deplete it and turn it to trash.
There used to be a beautiful green lawn with roses in it. 3 nights of rain, it was dead. Each time it rains, it just comes up black.
You're genuinely so scared of what is happening. It's untrustworthy and it's running out.
This is called a high point vent. That'll have everything in it.
The benzene, the toluene, the ethyl benzene.
Everything.
When your nose is burning, your eyes are burning, and you got that terrible oily sort of taste, I said, you know, the flares are not, they're just venting. Then other times, it's like little fibres in your throat, you know, the flare is on.
The majority of people that have visited us, they say, how can you live there? You know.
That's Voices from the Gas Fields. It's been up on YouTube now for 4 months, and it's had some 14,000 plus views. It's also been screened in locations all around the country, and the upcoming screenings, there is one that I'm aware of this week, and that's in York on a Thursday, and I will be there for the Q&A session. So that's at the Priory Street Centre. There's free food, apparently, from 6:30. The film at 7:30. It's a 1-hour documentary. And then an opportunity for question and answers afterwards. Then next week on Monday, for those of you that are not watching Fracking Nightmare in the Northwest, then in Chester, my good friend Joe Boyd is going to be dealing with the Q&A session there. The film is going to be held at Alexander's, which is at 2 Rufus Court in Chester. Then the following evening in Warminster in Wiltshire, and this is at the Civic Centre in Warminster, and again the screening starts at 7:30, Q&A at around 8:30. Then the following evening in Barnsley, and of course this is one of the new communities to be targeted in the 14th round, and this is at the Thurnscoe Coronation Club, Stewart Street, Thurnscoe, obviously a suburb of Barnsley there. So now if you are interested in hosting a screening of Voices from the Gas Fields, then obviously you are more than welcome to screen it. I hold no copyright on it, so I've released that. So you're more than welcome to screen it in your community. But if you would like some help with artwork, or you actually want me to come along and we can provide all the equipment, we can also provide, by the way, speakers from around the country, people who have been immersed in this issue for the last 3 years or more. Obviously, Helen Chuntso, who was with us tonight, may be one such person. So if you are interested in hosting a screening of Voices from the Gas Fields in your community, then either just do it, or if you want some help, contact me either by a private message on Facebook or by email. And the best email address to get me is ianrcrane@hotmail.com. So the anti-fracking community is the fastest growing social movement that this country has seen in a long time. We have well over 300 anti-fracking community groups around the country, and these are groups that embrace people from all walks of life, right across the social spectrum, the political spectrum, the philosophical spectrum, people who focus on the one thing that unites us all, our quest to shut down this insidious industry in this country and protect the ecology of this country for future generations. Thanks for joining me. My thanks to my guest, Helen Chuntso, and I'll see you next week.